Hey man, at first it doesn't look like loss at all. It looks like relief, distance, a quiet sense of freedom. When the connection ends, there's often calm instead of pain, lightness instead of grief. And if you're the man on the other side, that's the part that messes with your head the most. How easily she seems to move on, how unaffected she appears, how quickly life goes back to normal. In those early moments, emotion hasn't caught up yet. What she feels isn't the absence of you, it's the absence of pressure. No expectations, no adjustments, no need to consider someone else's rhythm. And that temporary relief can feel like clarity, even confidence. It convinces her that the decision was right. Meanwhile, you feel it immediately. The silence hits fast, the routine breaks, the small moments echo. You replay conversations, question choices, search for meaning. Loss arrives early for men because attachment was tied to structure, consistency, and presence. When that disappears, the vacuum is obvious, but her experience runs on a different timeline. At first, nothing feels missing. Life continues, distractions work, attention replaces connection, and because emotion hasn't demanded payment yet, it feels like escape, not loss. Time passes quietly, weeks turn into months, the initial excitement fades, newness wears thin, and that's when something subtle begins to shift. Not dramatically, not all at once, but internally. The absence stops feeling like space and starts feeling like something missing. It doesn't arrive as heartbreak, it arrives as comparison. A moment where no one listens the same way. A silence that feels heavier than before. A realization that the stability she once leaned against isn't easily replaced. And that's when memory starts rewriting itself. She doesn't miss the arguments. She doesn't miss the tension. She misses the presence, the consistency, the way things felt when they were solid. And because that realization comes late, it catches her off guard. Loss feels different when you didn't expect it to arrive. By the time it does, you're already elsewhere, emotionally, mentally, sometimes physically. You've processed what happened, you've rebuilt your rhythm, and because your grief came early, it didn't linger as long. Healing had time to do its work. Her grief, on the other hand, arrives without preparation. There's no clear moment to place it, no dramatic ending to attach it to, just a slow understanding that something valuable slipped away while she wasn't looking. And that's the truth most people never talk about. Loss doesn't always follow the ending. Sometimes it waits, sometimes it hides behind relief, and sometimes it only shows up when comparison fails, distractions fade, and reality finally asks what was taken for granted. What makes this delayed loss so powerful is that it arrives without a villain. There's no argument to blame, no clear mistake to point at, just a quiet awareness settling in that something dependable is gone. And because there's no dramatic moment attached to it, the mind keeps searching, replaying memories, reinterpreting moments, asking questions that didn't matter before. That's when the contrast starts working against her. New connections don't feel as grounded. Conversations don't flow the same way. The sense of being understood feels thinner, less certain. And slowly, without intending to, she starts measuring what she has now against what she once had. At first, she resists that comparison. She tells herself it's nostalgia, that time is distorting things, that everyone misses the familiar sometimes. But the feeling doesn't go away, because it isn't sentimentality, it's recognition. Recognition of something stable that didn't announce its value while it was present. This is when memory shifts tone. Moments that once felt ordinary gain weight. The way you listened, the way you showed up without being asked, the way your presence didn't need to be exciting to be reliable. Things she didn't consciously value then start resurfacing. Now, when they're no longer available, loss hits harder when it's paired with responsibility. Not blame, but awareness. The awareness that nothing was wrong enough to justify the ending the way it happened. That the door closed, not because something failed dramatically, but because comfort was mistaken for permanence. And unlike sudden heartbreak, this kind of realization has nowhere to go. There's no one to confront, no apology to request, no clear way to reverse time. The understanding just sits there, growing heavier with each reminder that what's missing isn't easily replaced. What she feels isn't longing for you specifically. It's longing for how things felt when she wasn't questioning everything, when life had rhythm, when consistency existed without needing constant stimulation. And once that feeling attaches itself to you, it doesn't fade quickly. Meanwhile, your silence does more than words ever could, not as a tactic, but as a consequence. Your absence confirms that the chapter is closed, that the stability she once leaned on has moved forward without waiting, and that realization makes the loss feel real. This is the moment many men never witness, because by the time it happens, you're no longer there to see it. You've processed your emotions in real time. You've rebuilt your structure, and the space you once held is no longer vacant, it's retired. That's why delayed loss feels so sharp. It arrives when replacement fails, when distraction wears off, and when reality finally asks an honest question: what did I let go of before I understood its value? And by the time that question is fully felt, the answer is already out of reach. What makes this realization linger is that it doesn't come with urgency at first. It comes during ordinary moments, a quiet evening, a routine day, a conversation that feels slightly empty. And in that emptiness, a thought slips in uninvited. This used to feel different, not better in a dramatic way, just steadier. And steadiness, once gone, becomes noticeable in its absence. She starts remembering how effortless certain things once were, how she didn't have to explain herself as much, how there was a sense of being met, not managed. At the time, that ease blended into the background. Now, surrounded by unpredictability, it stands out sharply. This is when regret becomes complicated. It isn't loud or emotional, it's quiet and analytical. She doesn't cry over memories, she questions decisions. She wonders whether the dissatisfaction she felt was real or simply boredom misinterpreted as misalignment. And because time has passed, there's no clean way to re-enter that space. Reaching out now feels risky. The moment has shifted, the balance is different. The version of you she once knew no longer exists in the same way, and she senses that instinctively. Meanwhile, you've grown into the space that was created. The absence forced structure, the silence forced focus. What once felt like loss turned into momentum, and that forward movement quietly closes doors without needing to slam them. Her awareness deepens when she realizes that what she misses isn't something easily recreated. Attention can be replaced, chemistry can be found again, but emotional reliability, the kind that doesn't fluctuate, is rare, and rarity always reveals its value late. That's when the loss shifts from emotional to existential. It's no longer about you, it's about what that connection represented. Stability, direction, a grounded presence that didn't demand anything to remain solid. Losing that feels less like heartbreak and more like misjudgment, and misjudgment carries weight, not guilt but reflection, the kind that sits quietly and resurfaces unexpectedly, during comparisons, during pauses, during moments when excitement fades and reality settles in. By now the regret isn't dramatic, it's internal. There's no urge to chase or fix, just an understanding that something meaningful was released before it could be fully measured, and that understanding arrives too late to act uncomfortably. This is why delayed loss cuts deep. It doesn't crash in, it seeps in, slowly, calmly, until one day it's undeniable. And by then, the man who once waited for recognition has already learned to live without needing it. What makes this stage heavier is that clarity has arrived without opportunity. She finally sees the pattern, but there's no clean way to step back into it. The timing feels off, the space feels wider, and the certainty that once came easily now feels unreachable. She senses that reaching out now wouldn't restore what was lost. It would only expose how much has changed. Not just you, but her. The moment she let go, something shifted in both directions, and time once passed doesn't reopen doors the same way. The memories that surface aren't dramatic ones, they're quiet snapshots, shared routines, familiar conversations, the feeling of being grounded without realizing it. Those are the hardest to replace, because they weren't created through excitement, they were built through presence. That's when the comparison becomes unavoidable. New connections may feel stimulating, but they don't feel safe in the same way. They require effort to maintain, performance to sustain, and slowly she recognizes the difference between something that energizes and something that stabilizes. This realization doesn't arrive with panic, it arrives with stillness, a pause, a moment where she wonders whether she mistook comfort for stagnation and independence for fulfillment. Those questions don't demand answers, but they linger. Meanwhile, your life has reorganized itself around forward motion. You're no longer waiting for validation, you're no longer replaying the past. The structure you built during absence has become your new normal, and it doesn't include reaching backward. She feels that distance intuitively, not because of words exchanged, but because energy has moved on. There's no invitation, no opening left ajar, and that finality makes the loss feel complete. What hurts isn't that you're unavailable, it's that you're stable without her. that the place she once occupied didn't remain empty, it evolved, and evolution leaves no room for nostalgia to step back in comfortably. At this point, the loss becomes internal rather than relational. It's no longer about getting you back. It's about living with the understanding that something valuable was released before it was fully understood. And that's where delayed loss settles, not as heartbreak, but as awareness. Awareness that timing matters, that presence has value, even when it's quiet, and that some lessons only arrive after the moment to act on them has already passed. What makes this awareness heavier is that it doesn't demand action, it simply exists. There's nothing to fix, nothing to confront, just a quiet knowing that something meaningful was mishandled through misunderstanding rather than malice, and that kind of knowing has a way of staying with you. She starts seeing how easily consistency can disappear once it's gone, how rare it is to find someone who shows up the same way over time without needing to be chased or reminded. That realization reframes the past, not as something dramatic that ended, but as something stable that was underestimated. The irony is that the very calm she once took for granted is what she now craves. Not excitement, not intensity, just the feeling of emotional ground beneath her feet. And the longer she goes without it, the clearer it becomes that what she lost wasn't easily replaceable. Meanwhile, your absence has done something important. It has allowed her memory to settle without interference. No arguments to rewrite the story, no mixed signals to blur it, just distance. And distance has a way of clarifying what presence once softened. She begins to recognize how much of her confidence back then came from knowing someone steady was nearby, not controlling, not overwhelming, just there. Losing that doesn't feel like heartbreak. It feels like the removal of a quiet support she didn't know she relied on. By now, regret isn't emotional, it's reflective. It doesn't say I want him back. It says I didn't see clearly when it mattered, and that kind of reflection doesn't scream. It sits patiently, resurfacing when distractions fade. There's also a subtle shift in how she views new connections. She's more cautious, less trusting of initial excitement, more aware of how quickly enthusiasm can mask instability. What once impressed her now feels insufficient. At the same time, she senses that the version of you she remembers no longer exists. Growth has taken place on both sides, and that realization closes the door quietly, without bitterness, without drama, just acceptance. What remains is a lesson carried forward, not spoken aloud, not posted online, just internalized, a recalibration of what matters, formed too late for the past, but relevant for everything that follows. And that's how delayed loss finally settles, not as pain that demands release, but as understanding that reshapes future choices. It doesn't undo what happened, but it ensures it won't be repeated the same way again. At this stage, the feeling isn't sharp anymore. It's settled. It lives beneath the surface, influencing choices quietly. She doesn't talk about it. She doesn't dramatize it, but it shows up in hesitation, in caution, in the way she no longer rushes decisions the way she once did. She notices how difficult it is to recreate what once felt natural. New connections require effort in places that never needed effort before. Conversations feel rehearsed. Trust feels conditional. And the ease she once thought was ordinary now feels rare. There's a growing awareness that the sense of safety she lost wasn't loud or exciting. It was consistent. It didn't announce itself. It didn't demand appreciation. And because it asked for nothing, it was easy to overlook until it was gone. By now she understands that the absence didn't hurt immediately because it didn't disrupt her world right away. The structure remained. Life continued. But structure without depth eventually feels hollow. And when the distractions fade, that hollowness becomes impossible to ignore. She begins to see how silence from you wasn't punishment or strategy, it was movement. Life didn't pause, it reorganized, and that reorganization is what made the loss permanent, not the breakup itself. What she feels now isn't longing, it's recalibration. Her standards shift, her tolerance for inconsistency drops. She becomes less impressed by surface-level charm and more attuned to stability she once overlooked. There's a quiet acceptance that some connections don't end because they were wrong, but because they were misunderstood. That thought lingers longer than anger ever could, because it carries responsibility without blame. Meanwhile, your absence has become normalized, not forgotten, but integrated. And that integration is what makes reaching back feel unnecessary, even if the understanding arrived late. This delayed awareness doesn't undo the past, it reshapes the future. It informs how she listens, how she chooses, how she measures value. The lesson stays, even if the person doesn't. and that's the final shape of delayed loss, not grief that breaks you, but insight that stays with you. Insight that arrives only after time removes distraction, and reality asks a simple question: what did I have before I realized what it was? This is also why most men never see this stage unfold. By the time the understanding arrives, there's no reason for contact anymore. Silence has already done its work, not loudly, not dramatically, but thoroughly. And what's thorough doesn't announce itself. From the outside, it looks like nothing happened, no message sent, no apology made, no attempt to reopen the past. But internally, something has shifted permanently. A reference point has been created, one that future connections will quietly be measured against. She begins to understand that the loss didn't come from being alone. It came from realizing how rare it is to feel anchored without effort, how uncommon it is to feel secure without control, and how easily those things disappear when mistaken for something guaranteed. There's a strange maturity that forms here. Not optimism, not cynicism, just awareness. Awareness that emotional timing matters, that stability has weight, even when it's subtle, and that some forms of value don't reveal themselves until contrast forces recognition. She no longer looks for constant reassurance. She's quieter now in her expectations, more observant, less reactive. The delayed loss didn't weaken her, it refined her. It narrowed what she's willing to accept, and still, the absence remains final. Because understanding something doesn't mean it can be undone. Growth moves forward, not backward. The moment passed, not because it was wrong, but because it was misread. Meanwhile, your path continued uninterrupted. What began as distance turned into direction. The structure you built didn't depend on being missed. It depended on moving forward, and that forward motion closed the chapter completely. She senses that completion instinctively. There's no opening to step back into, no lingering tension to resolve, just a clean ending that arrived quietly and stayed. This is where the lesson settles fully, not as regret, not as longing, but as wisdom carried into whatever comes next. A recalibration shaped by time, silence, and reflection. And that's the truth about delayed loss. It doesn't scream when it arrives. It whispers, it stays, and it changes how someone chooses forever, long after the person who caused it has already moved on. What silence really does is remove distortion. When there's no back and forth, no emotional noise, no mixed signals, memory is forced to stand on its own. There's nothing new to overwrite the past, nothing dramatic to justify the ending. Retroactively, silence leaves space, and in that space, truth becomes harder to avoid. The absence no longer feels like distance, it feels like finality, and finality has a way of sharpening reflection. Without contact, there's no reassurance to soften the realization, no friendly exchange to dull the edge of understanding, no opportunity to convince herself that things could still be different. Silence doesn't argue, it simply confirms. It communicates that life continued, that stability moved forward, that what was once available is no longer waiting, and that realization lands deeper than any conversation ever could. Over time, she notices how often her mind returns to the same comparison, not out of obsession, but out of reference. When something feels uncertain now, it's measured against how certain it once felt. When something feels unstable, it's compared to a steadiness she didn't fully recognize then. That reference point doesn't fade, it becomes a quiet standard that shapes future judgment. This is where the loss fully separates from emotion and becomes understanding. It's no longer about missing a person, it's about recognizing a kind of connection that doesn't show up often, one that doesn't overwhelm or consume, but holds its shape over time. Losing that doesn't hurt immediately, because its value was subtle, but subtle value once gone is painfully obvious. Meanwhile, your stillness has done something crucial. It's preserved your image as it was. No arguments to stain it. No emotional reactions to distort it. No explanations to weaken it. You didn't need to prove anything. You didn't need to convince. You simply moved forward, and in doing so, you allowed the memory of you to remain intact, instead of eroding through conflict. This is why delayed loss often feels heavier than immediate heartbreak. Immediate pain has somewhere to go. It can be expressed, processed, shared. Delayed understanding has nowhere to land. It's private, internal. It lives quietly in moments of honesty, when distractions fall short and comparison fails to soothe. She may never speak this realization aloud, not because it isn't real, but because it arrived too late to act on cleanly. Saying it wouldn't restore what was lost. It would only confirm what time has already sealed. So the understanding stays inward, reshaping choices instead of rewriting history. And this is where the cycle finally breaks, not through confrontation, not through closure, but through acceptance. Acceptance that some connections end before their value is fully known, and that no amount of reflection can rewind timing once it's passed. By now, the loss isn't heavy, it's integrated. It becomes part of how she navigates connection going forward, what she tolerates, what she questions, what she values when things slow down instead of speed up. The lesson stays, even if the chapter never reopens. That's the quiet ending most people never witness. No dramatic return, no emotional confession, just understanding arriving after movement has already carried you beyond reach. And in that understanding, the loss finally completes itself. Not loudly, not painfully, but permanently. What settles in after all of this isn't sadness, it's weight. Not a crushing weight, but a quiet one. The kind that sits in the background and changes how choices are made. She moves differently now, not because she's afraid, but because she's aware. Awareness has replaced impulse, and impulse rarely returns once it's been outgrown. She becomes more patient without trying to be, less reactive, less impressed by surface-level intensity. She's seen how quickly excitement fades when there's nothing underneath it. And once you've lived through that contrast, you stop chasing sparks and start noticing structure. There's a moment when she realizes that what she once had didn't demand constant validation. It didn't need drama to stay alive. It didn't require proving itself every day. That realization reframes so much of what she thought she wanted, and it stays with her longer than any emotion ever did. What's strange is that the absence no longer feels like absence, it feels complete, like a chapter that ended cleanly, even if the understanding arrived late. There's no urge to reopen it, because reopening wouldn't change what time already clarified. Meanwhile, the distance between you has become permanent, not emotionally, but structurally. Your life has moved into a shape that doesn't intersect with the past anymore, and that separation isn't hostile or cold, it's simply real. She senses that reality without needing confirmation. The door didn't close with force, it closed because life moved forward, and forward motion doesn't leave handles to pull on later. This is where acceptance finally settles, not as defeat, but as maturity. She doesn't resent what happened, she doesn't romanticize it either. She understands it for what it was, and that understanding brings peace, even if it came too late to change anything. What remains is a lesson that doesn't announce itself, but influences everything. How she listens, how she waits, how she evaluates consistency. It becomes part of her internal compass, guiding her quietly away from chaos and towards stability. And still, there's no need to return, no desire to revisit the past, because growth isn't about reclaiming what was, it's about recognizing what mattered and carrying that recognition forward. That's how delayed loss finally resolves, not with reconciliation, not with regret, but with clarity that arrives after movement has already done its work. And once that clarity settles, it doesn't pull you backward, it simply ensures you never misread the same kind of value again. By the end of this process, the loss no longer feels personal, it feels instructive. Not something that broke her, but something that shaped her. The kind of shaping that doesn't announce itself outwardly, but quietly changes how the world is perceived from then on. She doesn't tell this story to anyone. There's no reason to. It's not a wound, it's a reference point. A silent comparison that lives in the background whenever something new begins to unfold. What once felt replaceable now feels distinct. She understands that not every connection carries the same weight, and not every absence can be filled with something similar. Some things are singular because of timing, presence, and consistency aligning all at once. And still, life moves forward, not with regret, not with longing, but with adjustment. Expectations soften, choices become more deliberate. The lesson doesn't trap her in the past, it guides her away from repeating it. Meanwhile, you never needed to wait for this realization to happen. Your growth didn't depend on being missed. It depended on movement, structure, and choosing peace when chaos was no longer worth engaging with. That's the part most people misunderstand. Silence wasn't absence, it was completion. It allowed both paths to separate cleanly, without dragging unfinished emotion along behind them. Delayed loss isn't about punishment or karma, it's about timing. About understanding arriving only after distraction fades and reality stands on its own. And timing, once passed, doesn't circle back for convenience. What's left is clarity on both sides, but clarity that serves different purposes. Yours became direction, hers became discernment. Neither is wrong, they simply arrived at different moments, and that's how it ends. Not with reunion, not with apology, not with explanation, but with both lives continuing, shaped quietly by the same experience in different ways. Because sometimes the deepest loss isn't felt when something ends, it's felt when time finally reveals what was there all along, and you realize it only after it's no longer part of your life.